Hi everyone, welcome to the next episode of Principles Podcast, and our focus today is all about cognitive science. So cognitive science is essentially the science of how we learn, and obviously, we're a school. Our whole point is to teach young people things, and therefore the science of learning is really important. And I'm not sure it's something that's widely understood outside the intricacies of what happens in the classroom, so I thought it would be a pertinent issue to raise. Before we start, a reminder about who we are, what we stand for, what we believe in, and they are our CARE values. So we show courage, we're really ambitious, we're respectful, and we achieve excellence. That's what we expect from our young people. It's what I expect from myself. It's what I expect from my team. And it's what I would love to see from our entire local community as well. So in a nutshell, cognitive science, the science of learning. I think the most appropriate place to start would be, well, actually, what do we mean by learning? So a student could be in lesson in the morning and understand something. They could answer the question correctly. But ultimately, if they can't remember that, then they've not learned it, because learning is defined as the alteration in long-term memory. So can they remember it at the end of the day? Can they remember it at the end of the month? Can they remember it next year? Can they remember it in their GCSE exams? That's important. Okay, so there's a difference between performance and remembering. Remembering is when we have learned something. And then there's a handy infographic on the right hand side, which essentially shows us that in and amongst all the stimuli around us right here, right now, the thing we're paying attention to, so I imagine you're paying attention to the video, to my voice, to the slides that I'm sharing, the thing we pay attention to, we take in. And when we take it in, it goes into a part of our brain called the working memory. And our working memory is actually, it can only fit a little bit in, and whatever it has in there, it doesn't stay in for long. So new knowledge that you're purposely paying attention to goes into your working memory, and it's got two choices. It can either then be transferred to our long-term memory, or it can be forgotten. The vast majority of stimulus that we detect is absolutely forgotten because we don't pay attention to it over and over and over again. In a classroom, though, it's slightly different because we do things to help, first of all, knowledge get into the working memory, and second of all, we make sure as much of it as possible gets from the working memory into the long term. So we do that by practice, rehearse, repeat, because what this graph shows us is, this is called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, and it tells us that the first time we encounter content, if we don't cover it again, we're highly likely to forget it. But if we remind ourselves, or we remind the students of that content, and we cover it again, then we're more likely to remember it. And if we cover it again and again and again, the more we cover it, the more likely we are to remember it and therefore learn. And if we think about it, that makes common sense, because the reason you know your phone number is because you've said it off by heart, not just once or twice, but you've revisited it time and time again. Once we take in that new information, it goes into our brains and it forms something in education we call a schema. But essentially all it is that invisible network of understanding and everything you know inside your brain. But the thing about knowledge that we sort of try and sort of share with children and explain to our young people is that knowledge is great because it's really, really sticky, and you need knowledge in order to attach new knowledge to it. All right, so I can't understand respiration in science if I don't know the structure of a cell. I cannot expand a bracket in maths if I can't do multiplication. I cannot write a sentence in English if I don't know how to use a full stop. So everything we do relies on us knowing stuff first. So the more we know, the more easy it is to attract new knowledge and information. The analogy I use with students is, we think about that snowball rolling down from the top of a mountain. It rolls down, it rolls down. The larger it gets, the more snow it collects. It gets bigger, and then it collects even more snow, so it gets larger and larger and larger still. That's essentially what learning is like. And the evidence proves that as well. So as a school, your child's education is too important for me to take risk with. I am not going to chance their experience of school on things that I think sound good, sound nice, might be a little bit of an educational fad, it might be popular, but ultimately we only do things that are rooted in cognitive science. It's what the evidence, it's what the research tells us is the most effective things to do and the most effective ways to learn. That is what we believe our students deserve and our local community is entitled to. But the Matthew effect, essentially, it's called the Matthew effect after a chapter and verse in the Bible that essentially says those that have get more, those that don't have get less. And this educational research study, essentially, it looked at people from quite affluent families, and they found that when they started school, they knew loads of stuff. And people from less affluent families, people perhaps from more disadvantaged backgrounds, they tended to know less. They tended to have a less rich vocabulary. The difference wasn't that significant. In fact, if you can see on the graph, the green, the haves, compared to the oranges, the have-nots at the start, about 4 years old, yes, there was a difference, but it was quite a small gap. You can see here in the gap, in the graph actually, that throughout the sort of primary school age, you get to 10 years old, and the size of the gap has increased considerably. And that's what happens, because those that have get more because knowledge is really sticky. So those of us that have more knowledge attracts more knowledge and a greater volume of knowledge, so almost exponentially. And if we have less to start with, then we've got less to stick it to. So at the end of the process, we're not going to have as much. That's why for us, knowledge is really, really important, and that's informed our curriculum approach and our curriculum direction. We focus on the content, we focus on the facts, the information, the content, the knowledge that pupils need, the important knowledge, the powerful knowledge that helps them understand the world in which they live. We don't do airy-fairy research projects and everything like that. We believe the teacher is the expert, and they give students the knowledge that they need and the time to practice and rehearse so they still remember it in a day, in a week, in a month, and when it comes around to their GCSE exams. So that's the importance of knowledge. It influences everything we do, from the sequencing of the curriculum to make sure they've got that strong foundation, to the sequencing in lessons, because if you don't have a foundation, you can't add to it. If you don't have anything sticky, you can't stick anything else to it. To make the process easier, when new information goes into working memory, we break it down into small chunks, and lots of practice, lots of rehearsal. At the starts of our lessons, we do now activities. It's basically quiz questions, which have got nothing to do whatsoever with that lesson, but everything to do with what they learned last week, last month, last year, to make sure they're encountering that content and that knowledge again and again and again over time. And finally, our behavior routines are so important in this process, because right at the start, I said we only take in what we pay attention to. If we've got lots of distractions around us, we're not going to pay attention to the thing we need to. So that is why students deserve disruption-free environments, disruption-free classrooms, and that is why we've got a really warm, strict, but with high expectations behaviour approach, because we can't allow that under any circumstance. So what happens in classrooms is really good. Students are able to focus and pay attention on what we want them to, take the information in, they practice that information, they revisit it time and time again. So at the end, they remember it. Because they remember it, they can learn more and more and more, and then live happily ever after and live the life of their dreams, and hopefully like achieve well, get great outcomes, and ultimately grow up and leave school and get to do what they want to do, which is what it's all about. So thank you for listening to this Principles podcast. I hope you found it informative. If you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. But all our contact information is there, and I look forward to doing next week's podcast on a topic just as interesting and juicy as this one. Thank you very much.